This is a teeny tiny little Game Boy. How small is it? Well, yeah, it's pretty small. Do you ever feel small? Like a tiny little insignificant speck on a planet that is also a tiny speck floating out in the endless void of space that dwarfs your utterly insignificant existence? You do? Oh, well, that's weird. Maybe you should play some retro games and chill out instead of thinking about depressing existential things like that. Speaking of which, this right here is the RG Nano. It's a teeny tiny, itsy bitsy, teeny weeny little Game Boy that plays not only Game Boy games, but also a ton of other stuff like Nintendo, Game Boy Color, Game Gear, Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx-16, Sega Master System, Neo Geo Pocket, Sega Genesis, Game Boy Advance, and even PlayStation. I'm going to give you the full rundown on the quality and the experience of using it and let you know what I like and what I don't, help you decide if it's right for you. But before that, I feel I just need to address this. On a conceptual level, just think about this thing. How freaking lucky are we to exist in a timeline where this exists? It's a tiny little cheap Game Boy that has thousands of games on it. All your favorite games from the 8-bit and 16-bit era in the freaking palm of your hand. So this is just your reminder, you know, to remember how lucky we are to have these things. And with that out of the way, let's get on to the complaining. Actually, before that, real quick, I should mention that this was sent to me by Go Game Geek. They sell this. They sell lots of retro handhelds, but this is one of them. There's a link to this product on their store in the description below. Okay, now on to the complaining. I mean the review. On to the review. I'm going to get this out of the way at the start. This thing is probably too small for you to really enjoy playing lots of games on. I mean, sure, it can play PlayStation, but you're not going to enjoy spending 40 hours playing through Final Fantasy VII on this. Let's be real here. But that doesn't mean that you can't have fun with it. I've been carrying this thing around in my pocket for the last few days, and I gotta say, at first I was kind of skeptical that it's even worth trying to have fun with it. But now I get it. I figured out what it doesn't do well, and I know what it does well, and the stuff that it does is pretty darn fun. The hardware on this thing is one of the best parts about it. The build quality in general is shockingly good. It's an all-metal shell, and the moment that you get it into your hand, you can tell that this thing is meant to be taken with you out into the world. It's meant to be used because it's built like a freaking tank. The face buttons are small, obviously. I mean, everything about this thing is small, let's be real here, but their actual shape and the fact that they're a bit on the firm side makes them actually very usable. I have kind of medium-sized fingers, but I had no problem pressing whichever individual button that I wanted. The D-pad is probably the most interesting aspect of the controls. The entire D-pad feels like one big button, but it does rock along the center axis, and because of that, you can actually get whatever direction you want out of it pretty easily. The L1 and R1 are on top, but the distance is perfect to put your fingers up there while you're playing. And on the side, we have a power/menu/function button and a micro SD card slot. There's also a USB-C hole on top for charging and data transfer. The screen is one aspect of this device that lets it punch way above its weight class. It's a freaking awesome screen. It's bright and crisp and clear with great viewing angles, great colors. I doubt you'll find anything to complain about, apart from the fact that it's pretty darn small. Whether or not you'll be able to enjoy playing games on a screen this size, I can't tell you that. Do you have a problem seeing small things? If you're not into the idea of gaming on a tiny little screen, then probably just skip this one. All I can say is that for me, I actually think it's big enough to enjoy gaming on. I played a lot of it when I was testing it for this video, and I was expecting to hate it after a while, but that point never really came. For the sound, there's a single mono speaker on the underside. Now, let's be real, it's not going to be a big booming bassy sound coming from this thing, but it gets the job done. It's loud enough and it's pretty good quality. As for the system, well, there's a few things to talk about here. When you start it up, you'll be greeted by a clock. This is sort of a home screen, and in here you can press start to get into the games menu. Now there's two games menus. I'll show you the crappy one first. This is G Menu 2X. It's the same launcher that we've seen on older devices like the POW Kitty V90 and the RG 280V. It's functional. It's not super flashy. You can change tabs to the different sections. There's an emulator section with all your game systems. There's a media section that has an MP3 player and a video player. So you can use this to listen to music and watch movies if you're into that stuff. And under the applications, there's the usual stuff, the file browser, terminal, and under settings, you can change the wallpaper and the skin. But on this screen, if you press the function button on the side of the Nano, you'll get a menu that will let you switch the launcher to the Retro FE launcher, which is what I prefer to use. This is the same launcher that we saw on the Funkey S. It's a more full screen experience. It's the better launcher in my opinion. You can see the game box art nice and big, and you can change the skin on this too. You press that function button and you can cycle through the skins. The games list that comes on the device is pretty weird in typical anbernic fashion. They have lots of the games with some numbers in front so you can't view them alphabetically, and there isn't art for all the games, just the first few in the lists, and the games lists aren't complete. So I just went ahead and removed everything off the device and added my own complete ROM lists. And I even took the step of using Screen Scraper to scrape all the art. It's a lot of work to do all this though. You can use it out of the box the way it's set up by default. It's just going to be a bit janky because anbernic isn't great at making ROM sets. When you're in a game, we have a few useful in-game options. You can press the function button to be able to change the volume, the brightness, save and load your state with several different save slots, change the aspect ratio, and exit your game. When you're in a game, if you exit the game, it'll automatically save your spot and ask you next time you start it up if you want to continue from that spot. And if you hold the power button while a game is running, the system will shut down and it will automatically save your spot and then load you right back where you left off in your game as soon as you turn it back on. You can also use some in-game hotkeys. So hold the select button and use ABXY to change your brightness and volume. Here's what does what. And then you can use select in the D-pad to change the screen scaling and take screenshots. I really like having these in-game hotkeys because I find I change the screen scaling quite often depending on the game. Speaking of which, let's talk about this now because it's a big part of the gaming experience. This is a 1:1 ratio screen, which means that it's going to be amazing for Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, which were almost a perfect square ratio. It's a pretty small screen we have here, but Game Boy and Game Boy Color games aren't super high-res systems, so even in more text-heavy games, the text will be big enough to read. It'll be less good for 4:3 games like most of the retro systems, but that doesn't mean that it's terrible or anything. Systems like NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx-16, on those you can either stretch them vertically to fill the screen, or you can play letterbox with black bars above and below. And if you don't find it too small, then go for that. However, when you do that, the image does get a bit smaller. So I tend to prefer stretching them on games where the graphics don't get too weird. Like on Aladdin here on the Sega Genesis. I'd rather stretch it to fill the screen, even if it makes Aladdin look a bit more skinny than he usually does. We can also crop them in so that there's no stretching, but it'll cut off the left and right side to fill the screen. This is fine in some games, but not others. For example, in Aladdin, when the screen is like this, we can't see how many apples he has. Does he have one apple or 1,251 apples? I don't know. There is one more trick that we have here. So if you hold select and press left or right on the D-pad, we can zoom in and out. Cut just a little bit off the edge, get that screen as big as you want based on the game. However, I should mention that on some systems, the scaling is like broken. On TurboGrafx-16, for instance, if you select anything other than stretched, it'll actually make it like super widescreen, which is way more stretched horizontally. Look how freaking thick Bonk looks on here. So on this system and a few others, including PS1, you'll have to live with the vertical stretch, which means that you'll have an extra skinny Tony Hawk in PS1. Luckily, this hasn't kept me from enjoying most of these games because the stretch here isn't crazy, and the novelty of playing PS1 games on a teeny tiny little Game Boy outweighs the downside for me. And for the one sorta widescreen system, Game Boy Advance, that system was a 3:2 ratio, and when you scale that down to fit this screen, you lose so much screen real estate that the games become super tiny. Maybe for some like simple Game Boy Advance games it would work. I was playing Advance Wars and it was more or less enjoyable, but anything with lots of detail or lots of text, it's not going to be a great gaming experience on Game Boy Advance. But let me circle back to Game Boy. Game Boy and Game Boy Color alone make this device worth it for me, in my opinion. I love these games, and this device feels like it was made to play them perfect. And performance-wise, you won't be able to run every PS1 or Game Boy Advance game at full speed. I tested quite a few PS1 games, and only the hardest games like Bloody Roar 2 or Tekken 3 had slowdown like this. Most worked fine, so that's good news. And it's pretty impressive if you think about it that we get performance like this on a teeny tiny little Game Boy. Like I said at the start, it's kind of a magical thing, this RG Nano. You can have every single game from the older systems and a ton of stuff from PS1 all on a tiny little Game Boy that it's as small as a cookie. I'm not going to tell you that it's a comfortable gaming experience. There are lots of other handhelds you should be playing these games on instead of this thing. But the size and portability means that you basically have this with you every minute of every day. It's small enough that you could use it as a keychain for crying out loud. If you need a little Game Boy to keep in your pocket to play when you're bored at school, or to wear as a necklace as a conversation starter, or to store in a super secret place and smuggle it into prison, then the RG Nano is going to be a godsend. I didn't think I'd like it. I was expecting to conclude that it's a waste of money or just a stupid novelty. And it sort of is a novelty, to be honest. But that said, it's actually surprisingly playable. You can enjoy playing games on it, and I've actually had a ton of fun using this and showing it to people over the last few days. So, I'm going to give the RG Nano 4 RG Nanos out of 6.5 with a bonus official TechDweeb award of teeny tiny gaming fun times. And let's throw in a merry little halfling because I think halflings would really love the RG Nano. And since Go Game Geek sent this to me, it's my job to tell you to buy it from them. There's a link in the description below. And that brings us to the end. Let me know what you think of this thing. Do you think it's cool or stupid? Are you thinking about getting one? Let me know if you have any questions. Oh, and maybe check out my last teeny tiny little handheld review, the Funky S. That was a neat product. There's a link to that video on the screen and at the top of the description below. And that's it for me. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.